as Nayla shared, I now teach. So I teach at both Boston College and MIT graduate courses, and I teach a lot on this subject on digital marketing analytics. And this is a fun subject, although we've been hit with some really big challenges this year. And what I thought would be interesting today is for us to talk about, well, what are some ideas that you've been working on? What are some things that you've been doing as you've been looking at how you're creating demand? And how are you doing it for your customers? How are you doing it for new clients? And before we begin, as it turns out, John Penrose, who Nayla just introduced, he and I are high school friends. We've known each other for years. We're playing golf this weekend. And I said, wait a minute, what do you do? What is that data? And John has a very interesting business that he's done a study looking at how corporate America really feels about COVID-19. So we did a study looking at, a pretty large study looking at both the emotions, the feelings, and it really struck me as this is what we are marketing to. This is what we're marketing and selling to. So I want to share with you a couple of points, and then we'll talk about and share some ideas of what are others doing to market to this. And this is really kind of interesting data that John's company has created. And one of the things that came back was that less than 10% believe that we're going to go back to normal, which I think is true. And now you start to think about, well, what does this really mean? I think all of us are excited that restaurants are beginning to open up outdoors. We're getting out more. We're feeling a sense of normalcy. But we have to start to think about how will our business relationships change? And will we go back to where we were, or will things be very different? And what we're doing today, talking to each other in a digital forum, be something that's going to be the new normal. And I think it's very clear that things are not going to change to where we went back to where we were before this. They're going to be different. We have to think about how our fundamental relationships really are going to be different. And you clearly see that people in America are thinking very much along these lines to say, hey, this is just not going to be the same. Now, 60% are very worried about the health of their their loved ones, themselves. Actually, it's interesting, being now a teacher, a professor, I have to decide how will I teach classes in the fall. And the challenges you have when going to work is, are you bringing something back with you to your household? So that's a worry for people. And now think about if you're going to be, your salespeople are calling to have a meeting. Are people going to be worried about, well, what's it going to be like to interact with this person? Are they safe? Again, goes back to the first point that things will probably not go back to normal. So we'll have to think about how our relationships are going to change. This is not simply going to be, hey, this is this period of time, we just have to get through it. It's going to be much more sustainable than that. We're going to have to really think through the fundamental relationship of how we're dealing with people, because people are worried about their own health, and they'll be worried about how they're interacting with you. My old company, Sirius, I guess timing is everything. Last year in 2019, we sold a business. Our largest event had 5,000 attendees in 2019. Suddenly, you're faced with this challenge. So they moved the event to online. They still got 5,000 people to attend. It was more virtual, but the reality is, I think that's going to be the newer model of how we think about events. We might have some things that are going to be in person, but that virtual aspect of events, that pivot that we've all had to make, I think is going to be very important, because you probably don't want to get on a plane to go to an event. You probably don't want to go to a place where there's a large number of people until we feel a little more comfortable. And even then, you'll have to ask yourself, what does that really mean when we're thinking about how we're interacting with folks? I thought this was interesting now in the work that Leading Indicator Systems did, thinking about, gee, how are people interacting within their business? And I think a lot of the people, because there's technology companies online here, are pretty used to dealing with things and how to deal with working remote, but other managers are not. So only 1 of 3, we're not quite getting the, kind of felt like they're not getting the expectations from their managers. So there now is, imagine you've got somebody who's isolated. Okay, things are not going to go back to normal. A little worried about my health. I'm actually very worried. I'm not getting the direction from my managers. And also half of them feel disconnected, more disconnected from their teams, because they're used to going in and seeing that camaraderie around the office, and that suddenly is not there anymore. So that has to change a little bit. Actually, that's an interesting aspect of how do you connect with teams? How do you help people connect with your teams? Because a lot of you are even marketing to a group of people that are trying to make a decision. So you need to pull them together, figure out how to connect with them, figure out how to have fun. I'm on a board of a company which I joined this really cool customer event that they had where they were playing a version of Family Feud. It was like just a game that they're playing online. I thought, well, this is really going to be a silly idea. It was actually pretty cool. And a lot of the companies that they were dealing with, then they took the idea and went back to their own teams. So it was an interesting way for them to share an idea and then bring that idea back. 70% are worried about their jobs and where this is going. Clearly, you know, certainly looking at those that have been furloughed, but also what does this mean longer term? You know, I'm a proud father of 3 kids, one of which is in marketing. And the very first thing she said, Dad, I feel vulnerable that I have a marketing role. It's like, no, you shouldn't be vulnerable. You should be leading. Those are the things that you're going to require the organization to understand how the markets really will need to react. And marketing is going to lead that role. So I think she's, I think I calmed her down. But again, that's a feeling that people have. Most of us feel, and most people that, you know, were in the survey that John's company put together, feel that they're more productive at home too. So they may not be in a rush to go back to work. We might be interacting with people remotely, even as we find, you know, that the virus gets more and more to where we can deal with it from a health standpoint. This aspect of, hey, we're more productive at home, more companies have experienced this. So this is an interesting aspect. And this is, of course, we're sending as demand generators or salespeople out into the world digitally to interact with folks, and the vast majority feel that the salespeople are not, are kind of ineffective or insensitive sometimes during this crisis. Now, I think my friend John would say, yeah, but you also need to take in context that they might say that anyway, generally, in the outreach that they're getting, that they may not be as comfortable as other forms of outreach, but it's more sensitive, I think, given where we are today. So this is a really interesting sort of capture of, hey, this is how we're going to need to market and sell, or the aspects that we're dealing with marketing and selling, and it's some challenges. Now I want to pivot and start to talk about, well, what are people doing? How do we think about this? And we'll break it down into a couple different areas. Before I do that, I'll let John Penderez, I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add or I missed maybe in the summary of the study that you guys did.
Yeah, thanks, John. And thank you for including me. So the full study is available on our website, and I can send you a link. But this is all the kind of the standard types of survey questions you might expect to see. We took it one step further. We have an emotional measurement tool, which is image-based, and we use a framework that gets into the subconscious emotional response of workers. Because that's where you really need to operate. Sales and marketing understands that more than anybody in an organization. You know, you really need to know your customer at a more profound level. And so I guess the takeaway here would be, when we look at that emotional response data, which isn't on the screen here, what we see is fundamentally the emotional landscape has changed. So if you're selling and marketing, you need to understand that. Pre-COVID, if we looked at the landscape, the tent poles, if you will, the most important emotional needs for workers were around achievement, empowerment, and recognition. So landing the big deal that would get them the promotion, or signing up for the new initiative, buying your solution, was the way for them to meet their emotional needs and succeed in their organization. That is off the table right now, and that need profile is completely flipped. What people need are things like safety and security, not surprisingly, a feeling of connectedness, much more foundational kinds of issues. JJ mentioned about the teams and the need to connect. They also need this higher purpose, some sense of what they're doing in the grand scheme of things when we're facing a pandemic. That it means something. So if your sales and marketing pitch is an appeal to pride and all, that's probably not going to work as much now as an appeal to purpose. And I'll let it go there because this is fascinating stuff, and I think the group here will have a lot to say. Thanks, John.
Yeah. Thanks. Actually, what's fun, what's not fun, I shouldn't say fun, what's helpful about this is as I looked at this, I thought it was interesting to say, gee, if I were to start writing copy on an invitation or an offer, I would want to read this first. I'd want to sort of understand it, sort of build this into the language, because the language is really, really important. So that's, I think, an important aspect as we think about, and I know all of you today are rethinking how you're doing your outreach. I mean, people still have business decisions they need to make. They still have needs for your products and services. You need to message them, but the nuance of what people are dealing with probably creates a greater sensitivity. So, and I find that, you know, there's this euphoric nature that we have in the press where, great, we're getting closer to a vaccine, we feel better, we're more confident. Oh dear, the set of cases are going up. So we're going to have this up and down in the press that we're going to have to deal with, but these fundamental emotional issues are things that we're going to have to market to. That messaging becomes really important. So with that in mind, we'll talk about that, but we'll also talk about some of the key issues that I know all of you are facing today. And we'll go through each of these. I'm going to put them up on the screen so you can see them. And then Tom and I'll kind of go through a little Q&A, and then we'll ask some of you to participate to give us some of your thoughts as well. And the first is, and this is an observation that back in my Cirrus days, if you go back to 2001, 2008, where there were crises of the economy, the first thing that you could see in terms of spend is that organizations would focus a lot on their customers. So they'd spend time thinking about, how do I make sure during these challenging times I protect my customers? So the first question is, what are you doing to maintain your customer base? What are the things that you find that are unique that you could share with the team? The second is, you all also need to figure out, how do we grow? How do we grow the business, and how do you become more selective into the companies that you're going after? What are things that you're doing from cross-selling and upselling? Really, this isn't easy. So we'll talk about some ideas, some nuances. And the next is the buyer's journey. I mean, I think in what we just heard, how we're buying is definitely put on its side. So how do you rethink this buyer's journey? And I actually am having a lot of fun in teaching these students. And one of the things that we did in the Boston College class is I taught them the principles of digital marketing analytics, and then we brought in 4 companies to build a marketing plan. They had to do the buyer's journey, and they're halfway through that. Then the COVID crisis hits, so I had them go back and rethink all of it, which was fun to watch them rethink, put some fresh thinking about how this might change. And finally, are there other ideas to share? So we've got some ambitious things to talk about. I'm going to start on the customer focus, and Tom, I'd love you to share with you, how Rapid7 is thinking about your current customers. What are some of the things that you're putting in place that you can share with the team? Then we'll open it up to other ideas that folks have.
Yeah, thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. Nice to connect with you, albeit virtually, and spend some time talking about these very worthwhile topics. When I sort of think about Rapid7 and how we've really thought about helping our customers be successful and using those strategies to sort of, as John's articulated, connect and protect, I sort of think about it in 4 broad areas. The first is, really revalidating both with individual customers and at scale. Are our customers seeing value in the software and the technology that they bought from us? And are they seeing kind of value and progress in their security programs? I think we're in a very interesting space in the security market where a lot of customers are broadly dissatisfied with the outcomes they're getting from their security programs, and they're not seeing necessarily a ton of progress. And a lot of security, as with a lot of technology, I think gets acquired but never really fully deployed, and the customers don't see value. And so going through that process, albeit at scale with around 9,000 customers globally, both at scale and individually, about how do we really understand whether our customers are using our tools, or whether they're seeing success in those tools, and whether they're seeing progress. I think that's been an important sort of part for us to go through. The second is as an extension of that, is really understanding that all of our customers are in slightly different places depending on kind of their security maturity. And so as we sort of entered this the sort of new COVID world, we had a perspective that there'd be certain areas or segments of our business that would be more directly impacted with what's going on. Healthcare, retail, aviation are kind of all examples of areas where we thought there would be impact. I think what we've seen is that is true in some areas, but not necessarily true across the board. And when you sort of layer in geography and some of the other factors as well, I think we've really formed this perspective that our customers are all in different places. They're all trying to deal with some level of commonality in enabling a remote workforce, but also unique challenges themselves. And I was talking to a customer in the UK about 2 months ago, and we were talking about kind of how we could help them be successful. And they said, there's really not a huge amount you could do for us right now. We appreciate the offer. Our problem is 95% of our staff work on desktop computers, and so we got to figure out how to get them remote. And so everyone's got these kind of unique challenges, but we put a bunch of programs in place that we internally kind of called our flex programs, which essentially allowed our customers to consume any of the products on our security platform at an unlimited rate for 90 days free of charge, and then we'd reevaluate it with them at the end. And we've had a ton of positive feedback on that, because certainly within our space, customer environments are changing, their security infrastructure is changing, and so giving them unlimited access to all of our tools for a period of time has really allowed them to kind of accelerate that. And in the short term, I think that's provides a great level of commitment to the customer, but also as we talk about growth in the next section, helps us kind of understand, are we covering all of our customers' environments, and does that give us opportunity kind of further down the line to increase our relationship with them? And so that's been sort of key for us. We set a pretty ambitious goal of having 20% of our customers in that program, and we're well on the way to doing that. So we talked about, really, are our customers being successful, and then can we help them kind of flex up to cover more of their infrastructure during this challenging time. I think the third thing that we've really pushed ourselves to do is, we're a fast-growing, maturing organization, is really go back and look at the processes and the systems and the tools that we use to interact with our customers, and are they fit for purpose in kind of this sort of new COVID world. And I think this may resonate with some of you on the call. As we've been going through that, I think we found that a lot of the processes and systems and the way that we interact with our customers, whether that be support or billing or kind of other mechanisms that we've got, they were, if we're being honest, they were built a little bit to be self-serving to us. And they've worked for us, but they haven't necessarily worked for our customers as much, where there's been sort of friction in the process, and it's been difficult to sort of deal with those in certain situations. And I think one of the things we've been seeing is, customers are pivoting to kind of one or two extremes. They're really appreciating excellent customer service and interaction and the desire to help them be successful. We're also seeing that the tolerance for sort of lower for poorer experiences to be lower than perhaps it was sort of pre-COVID world, right? And so we've been going through a lot of processes to really look at the systems, the tools, the way we interact, the way we communicate, and are they done to sort of make our lives easier or make our customers' lives easier? And if it's the former, then really revisit those and change those as quickly as we can, because we know the tolerance for a lower or a poorer customer experience is lower than it was today, or sorry, it was a couple of months ago. The fourth thing I think we've heard from a lot of customers, and this again has been an interesting one, and not one that I think we necessarily thought we'd run into at the start, is there really is a stronger desire more than ever to connect with customers who are also Rapid7 customers who are having a similar experience to them. And so we spend a lot of time debating and testing out internally, well, what does that really mean to customers? Do they want to talk to people who are in a similar geographic area to them? Do they want to talk to people who are in a similar role to them? So maybe they're in a C-level role versus a practitioner role. Do they want to talk to people that are in a similar size to them? And what we netted out at as we tested a few of these models was really people had a strong bias towards sharing ideas, interacting with, and validating that they were on the right lines with people who are in the same geographic area as them. And so when we've run virtual events in New York, the dialogue's been a lot more about, obviously with that being a heavily impacted area of the world, the dialogue and the sort of attendance rate has been a lot more around, it's great to see there are other people in the same geographic area as me who are experiencing similar things, both professionally and personally. And so we've really focused on how do we build forums and communities, and how do we engage with our customers to bring them together to help them share experiences. John?
So Tom, that's interesting. What is interesting about what you guys have done is you've really rethought that customer experience and made sure that how do we up our game to ensure that experience our customers are really, really viewing as superior. And the connection among your customers is quite interesting. So I would imagine that those virtual meetings that you're having, that's an interesting concept, where I've heard others that have said, gee, we have this program where our clients will put in a portal, here's the key issues that we're working on. We'll connect them with other clients. We're that conduit. We're helping them to connect them, which is very, very valuable. So I think it's really quite interesting. I'm curious too, on the decision that your company had to open up your products and services to your customers. I would imagine pre-COVID that might have been a difficult decision. Was it easier for the company to make post-COVID? And what are you seeing of the impact so far?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think we're very much on a journey for, you know, refocusing our organization that's been very heavily growth focused. You know, as we've been sort of accelerating our growth, much more to just the broad sentiment across our industry of how do we really focus on helping customers be successful. So I think, you know, to your first question, we were on that path anyway, I think, and as we've evolved our sort of platform of security programs, we're always looking at how can we become more strategic and more ingrained with our customers. You know, I think certainly as we were looking at, we wanted, you know, there was a desire to help our customers. There was an understanding that many of them were feeling pain. And so it was a relatively quick and easy program to put together, in the sense of, this is something we can do. This is something that we think is valuable. And we think this is something that customers are going to take advantage of and they're going to appreciate. And you know, I think I've seen sort of different flavors across the security and technology world of these. I think where I've seen it done well, or it's had an impact, is much more of a focus of how do I help our customers get through some short-term or potentially long-term pain, versus how do I present them with something, to your point earlier, which is, yes, it's a little bit of a Trojan horse, right? I want to be helpful, but actually what I'm really interested in is how do I monetize this as quickly as possible? And I think, you know, we've definitely had the approach of how do we get something into market? How do we help our customers, large or small, be successful? How do we make it easy for them? And how do we take the pressure away of being concerned about cost or resourcing or any of the other things that they're trying to deal with right now, and just say, use it, take as much as you need, and we'll have a conversation with you later down the line as your situation starts to become a little more stable. You know, in terms of impact, I think, you know, I haven't got the last numbers, but I think the last time I checked, we were up to protecting nearly more than 1 million assets than we were pre-COVID as part of the program. And so for us, you know, it's been hugely impactful in engaging with our customers, having a dialogue with them, understanding where they're at, and then actually being able to help them make some progress and better secure their infrastructure.
Excellent, thank you. I'd love to hear from others. So either, you know, if you got a question for Tom or I, or just to share some ideas that you've had, particularly in looking at how you're protecting, managing, focusing on your customers.
John, I'm going to jump in there and say, maybe, unless you have other slides, maybe we'll take the slides down and people can turn on their cameras and contribute with maybe your own personal case study or a question to John, Tom, or the group.
Okay, so questions on specifically customers. We'll get to the growth in a minute, but I'm just curious of ideas that you have and how you're protecting and managing your customers and during these challenging times.
I can chime in here to start the conversation, if that's all right. No problem. So OCD Tech is a division of an accounting firm called O'Connor and Drew. OCD Tech focuses mainly on the IT audit, security, and assurance practice. So one of the things we've been doing these last few months, in addition to continuing our existing scheduled engagements, instead of taking a traditional, you know, identify new opportunities, prospect, and go to proposal stage, a lot of that has slowed down. Some folks are, you know, quite frankly, just not interested in having those conversations at this point. So we've made an effort to really step up our ability to educate our clients rather than sell to them. So we're keeping an eye on basically any and every new IT security regulation or standard that might be coming out. For example, the Department of Defense is going through a pretty significant overhaul to their cybersecurity standards right now. that's prompting a lot of questions with some of the firms and partners we work with. Instead of, calling and presenting myself as the company that they can buy DoD services from, I'm really focusing on, hey, what are your questions? What don't you understand? Please, use me as a resource and bounce any of your questions off me, regardless of how, silly or relevant you feel they may be.
Yep, excellent. Excellent. So you're taking much more of an approach where, look, I'm an advisor. I'm here to give you intelligence, here to give you education. So I do agree with you that I think people are more apt to consume it during this time, consume content, as well as taking advice. I've certainly heard more of that. Any others on the line that want to share either ideas or have thoughts, particularly as it relates to your customers? Kristen, how about you? I'm going to call on a few people here. I think Kristen, your mic is there.
Are you calling on me?
I am. Sorry, I should probably use your
Yes, PLC, but I am on the membership side.
Okay.
Something that we've been doing, and hopefully many of you have heard from us, is just really, we've been pivoting quite a bit in our business because, as you know, we did a lot in person. So you're seeing meetings like today virtual, but we've also actively been scheduling time with all of our members to kind of understand what are the challenges they're facing, how can we help as we pivot so that we can move our business in the right direction. And for MassTLC, we're the community, so our members are very much in different places, as Tom said. We've got some members who are doing really well in this time, and we have some members in sectors that have been highly affected. So a lot of what we've put forth has been in, meeting the needs of the community as a whole.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to pivot now and go to growth, because this is always a challenge. How do you grow during a challenging time like this? Because given certainly some of the sensitivity we've seen and how corporate America is thinking about our interactions, but at the same time, you have to be focused much more on growth. So Tom, I'd love to hear a little bit more on how is Rapid7 thinking about the growth portion of how do I find new customers? How do I cross-sell and upsell? What's some of the thinking and the programs you guys have put into place?
Yeah, thanks, John. So the other half of my world, aside from the customer piece, is obviously leading the team that focus on the growth piece. And I think the first piece we talked about really driving that dialogue with the customers and really understanding, where they're at and how do we meet them. There has been a huge, we've definitely seen a shift towards that as a driver for our cross-sell and our upsell opportunities and that kind of adjustment. I think, to Kristen's point, I said it earlier, we've got a very wide spectrum of customers. We've got some customers who are saying to us, hey, right now, things are just a little bit too chaotic and I need to take a pause and just kind of get myself back on track. We've got a lot of other customers where just everything that's going on in the world is accelerating how they think about making technology investments, right? And so in our world, I think, as I was thinking about this morning, a couple of areas that have been really interesting for us is, we've seen a shift towards one particular area of our portfolio, which is very much focused on securing or helping to secure remote working, right? And that's been a sort of shift in our dynamic. One of the other things we've seen is, certain segments, education is a great example, where their security teams are trying to work through, hey, I had all of these kids in school right now, everybody's now sort of Zooming or doing other sort of virtual engagements. And so how do I take what was essentially a relatively controlled security environment that's now become highly dispersed, and how do I spend dollars and work with vendors to kind of make that secure? So it's kind of creating sort of one of the two within our existing customer base for sort of cross-sell and upsell opportunities. When we think about sort of net new acquisition, we spent a good chunk of time, and again, we're still trying to understand a lot of the dynamics here, but we really went back and we looked at what is the makeup of our sort of growth engine today? How does it look by industry? How does it look by geography? How does it look by sort of types of deals and the length of those deals? And we started to form a perspective around what is the risk in the engine today and how is that going to affect our business going forward? And so, and I'll share it with this group, we went through a classification by industry and looked at which industries do we think are, heavily impacted versus moderately impacted versus relatively low impact. And as we went through that process and we looked at the types of leads we'd historically got and the pipeline that we built, we became more comfortable with the new environment because it was less than 10% of our pipeline was in some of these areas we consider to be high risk, right? Or whether it be sort of concern. And so that was sort of the first piece, is just revalidate kind of where we were at and how we thought about moving forward. The second is, you talked, John, in your first slide about, I think it was less than 10% of people expect things to kind of go back to normal afterwards. We went through a process of really looking at, all right, the business that we've now got and the business we're going to have in the future, it might not be the same as what we've had previously. And so how do we think about evaluating growth and what kind of good looks like, right? And so, we went back and we looked at all of the metrics and the indicators, both sort of leading and lagging of what we would consider good to be versus has that changed. And so we have made a sort of intentional shift away from things like just a pure pipeline build, right? A volume game. Are we building more pipeline than we were 12 months ago? That was always a good indicator for us, as sort of a leading indicator and a lagging indicator of current and future performance. I think we've made some adjustments where, yes, we still look at it, and yes, we are cognizant of it, and of course we want to grow, but we're also looking a lot more now at, like, what are the industries that pipeline makes up? What are the geographies that pipeline makes up? How are certain areas of our business changing, and is our found and won rate increasing in quarter in certain areas? And so, again, for us, it's become less of a volume play, more of a let's understand the granularity and really focus on the areas where we think there's less of a serious and significant and short-term impact, and to be transparent, more areas where we think there's opportunity to go get found and won within quarter. And we've seen that number move in certain areas of our business from sort of in the mid-30s range up above 50% when we've targeted the growth engine into those segments as well. And so it's managing the sort of short term versus the long term, and how do you do those two things together. The third thing is as we look at sort of growth and we look at the leads that are coming in the segments, is our business may have changed and our customers' business may have changed, and so, or our potential customers. And so projects that they may have prioritized 2-3 months ago and have had budget to do, those projects may not exist anymore, right? And so, again, we've seen interesting shifts in our business and readjusted our growth engine and our demand generation efforts to more closely align with the feedback that we're getting from our sales team and our customers on, these are the areas where customers are really starting to activate now. And so how do we shift dollars and resources within the marketing engine around to kind of focus in those areas? The fourth is, we've made a pretty conscious decision to adjust the way that we think about our follow-up. And so our model at Rapid7 within sort of marketing growth engine is a pretty traditional, marketing qualified lead through to an inside sales or a business development rep who then qualifies that and passes that to a sales team. I think we've revisited how we think about that and how we and the types of leads and engagements that we're passing to that business development team, because we want to be cognizant that, as we talked about earlier, customers are in different places and they may not appreciate a phone call or a conversation at this point. And so we've been intentional in ramping up some of our programs that we're calling sort of internally, really give customers or potential customers the ability to raise their hand and say, I'm ready to have an engagement. And so, digital is a great example of that. Online chat has been a great tool for us with our friends at Drift who are just down the street in Boston. And some other programs that we put in place where historically we may have internally felt that engagement was ready for a conversation with someone. We're being a little bit more empathetic and sensitive to those engagements right now and putting the onus on our customers or our prospects to raise their hands and say, yes, I'm ready to have a conversation. And so what we have seen, and again, we're still working through this and trying to figure out where's the sweet spot. But in the last month, I think when we think about that engine, we've seen a reduction in the number of conversations that our inside sales teams are having, which has put a little bit of pressure in the engine. On the flip side, they're being 30% more efficient year over year because the conversations they're having are tending to be with people who are really raising their hands. And so that's been a very interesting learning for us on how do we think about the sort of the pendulum of too many conversations or we're perhaps infringing and people aren't ready versus sort of getting our internal team productive, and where's that right line for us? John?
You know, it's really interesting to hear what you've done, Tom, and your colleagues at Rapid7, because in many ways, you've looked at your segmentation and say, okay, we're going to put it over here for a little bit. Now let's start to look at every single industry and determine which industry is going to be most effective. Let's look at the projects we normally market to and which are the ones we really should focus on. So in a lot of ways, you know, as I think about, of course, the guy mowing my lawn just shows up. In a lot of ways, if I think about Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, if you really look at that startup mentality, you really try to figure out, well, who are the early adopters? So we're now thinking, who are the early adopters in this new environment? Which industries are going to be more appropriate? Within those industries, who are the buyers going to be most appropriate? What are the projects? And a lot of us, you know, a lot of folks on the call here, you've benefited from a very broad market. And I think what we heard from Tom is, I'm going to prioritize this market and make it much more smaller, much more focused, and you can see the productivity that you're getting with your salespeople. I mean, that is really, really great, the number of conversations that they're having, that productivity is much more effective. So it's hard to do, and it's interesting. And when I talk to the intent monitoring companies, you know, like a Bombora or Everstring, all of them are feeling a little good about their business because they're finding organizations are trying to figure out what are other search terms people are looking at. They're rethinking industries, therefore they're thinking about intent differently. So it's an interesting aspect, and it puts a lot of pressure on the organization, I realize, from a data standpoint, systems, but it's really probably where the heart, I think, of more success can come from, by trying to take that big market, make it more focused, and really find the areas of growth through the evidence that you can do within your analysis, which was excellent. So
yeah,
I'll bring it.
Sorry, I said one of the other things I think that's been interesting for us is, you know, as we've been building out this growth engine for the past sort of 7 months, we've very much tried to have a mentality in sort of 2 areas. And again, it's an ongoing journey for us. The first is, how do we build a sort of hypothesis-based sort of growth engine, right? And like, how do we form a perspective and then use a combination of sort of qualitative and quantitative to sort of either prove that right or prove that wrong? I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is, and in addition to that, sorry, how do we do that in a way where we're not sort of doing analysis by paralysis, right? How do we really focus on impact and getting things done quickly and forming a perspective and then testing and validating, right? That's sort of the first thing. And then the second thing is, as we think about future investments within the marketing engine, how do we have a dialogue both within the team and the rest of the business that, here's our hypothesis-based model, and we think we can put dollars to work in this area because this is the best bet of success, right? And I think, you know, to your point, John, like, one, I think it's reframed within the team, what are the right channels or motions for us to go to customers? The second is, it's made the dialogue with my partners across to the rest of the business and sort of my key stakeholders outside of marketing, whether that be finance or our sort of sales organization, being able to have that dialogue with them and really, you know, focus on, hey, here's the hypothesis that we're testing and we want to work with you on that piece. We found that it's sort of been a pleasant secondary benefit of the sort of interactions as part of this new world, because we're having a much better dialogue with the teams about, well, is there really an opportunity here? And like, how do we think about putting dollars to work? And is marketing the right way to do it? Or our sales organization, or our customer success, or our channel partners, and what is the right lever for us to pull to help our customers, but also get in front of people that are looking at projects that we may be able to help them with.
Love that. You know, it's my quote of the week. I read this book called Restoring the Soul of Business by Richard Tabakawala, and he has a story where he says, you know, Plato said that good decisions are made with knowledge, not data. But if Plato were to rewrite that in today's world, he would say the best decisions are made with knowledge and the right data. And I think that's to your point. You're getting the right data together, but you're using the evidence that you have internally, the knowledge you have internally, to say, here's how we're going to apply it. And I think that's really, really great. And actually, this is a very productive discussion to have internally with an organization when you think about it, because it's very difficult in marketing when you get pressure to say, well, we should go after everybody. And yes, you can, but what are you going to do right now? And now you really need to have that level of focus, and it requires the organization to come together. That's really great. Before we go on to the next subject, any questions, comments from anybody else? I'm curious to see if there's any other ideas that people would like to share. Carl.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Yeah, so just one thing we're doing on the customer side with Synopsys that's been very successful since March, since this started, is we realized it's really hard for our sales reps to actually reach customers because they're all working from home. They also have a lot of time on their hands. So what we did really early was we just designed and executed a product training program that runs every month. So it's free product training, advanced training for our products. So something that they normally wouldn't get, and we do it for free. And the purpose of it, yes, is to get customers to be happier, but it's really to give our sales team a chance to see who's interacting and get in touch with them. We also do a follow-up once a month for new product features that are released. We do a separate webinar for that. That one is followed by what we call office hours. So product experts will get on those webinars for office hours following this presentation, and they can actually ask live questions. And then we deliver those questions back to sales so they know what their accounts are asking about and then how to customize follow-up. So just on the customer side, that has been super successful. Another thing we do is, I think if you are doing renewal kits or you're sending some mailers in the past, what we're doing now is work from home kits. We've designed these mailers to be sent to their homes with products that are designed more for them and their families, but that are branded with Synopsys. So it's kind of an easy touch way, like something that's, we use like local products from all of our different offices that we package together. Some of them are branded, and then there's things for like their kids to do. That's been super effective for customers to reach back out to us to thank us and give sales again a chance to have a more direct connection when they're separated. So those are some ways on the customer side that we've revamped our programs.
Love that work from home kit. That's a really, really cool idea. I mean, you used to maybe think of when I used to go to trade shows and bring up all this little tchotchke stuff, and really my kids that were using it. So here you are giving this work from home kit. By the way, here's some tools that you might be using for, the homeschooling that you're doing and you didn't count on or otherwise. Yep. That's really interesting. That's a great branding and strategy.
John, do you mind if I jump in and ask a question? Because I think Carl sort of touched on it. One of the things we've seen that I've been very interested in, and I think Carl, you alluded to this, is this sort of model of, someone hits the website or they provide you with the information, they get a phone call. I think one of the challenges we've had is a lot of these people are providing office phone numbers, right? And so trying to get hold of someone right now is nearly impossible. One of the things we've seen a great deal of success with, which I don't know how I feel about it. Sometimes I feel good about it. Sometimes I'm a little sort of feel like it's a little lazy and we're not doing our job as effectively as we could do. Is John, you talked about sort of Bombora earlier, and we've been partnering with Bombora and a company called Sendoso, and we've seen huge traction with our quote unquote e-gifting program, whether that's programs where we're sending physical whoopie pie kits to IT professionals who are at home with their families, they've got something to do with their kids, or we're sending outdoor games, or we're sending them a jersey from the college that they graduated from. And so sometimes I sort of think it's a, I don't know how I feel about it. Sometimes I think it's a little bit lazy and maybe there's a smarter way we could be doing marketing. But for us, that's really helped us bridge that gap of, hey, it's tough to get hold of people on the phone because primarily our database is full of people that have office phone numbers. Can we get creative and think about doing things a different way? And that's been a huge driver for just starting conversations with people. Is anyone else seeing that?
Yeah, we're seeing that. And we're also seeing, in addition to, like you're talking about gifts, is they can opt to, instead of get something, they can make a donation to a charity that's important to them. So that's been really effective. We used to use it at trade shows. A lot of times people come to trade shows and, for us, supporting girls who code is really important. So everybody who comes by our trade show booth, we make a donation. And we're doing that same motion with exactly what you're talking about with, instead of doing this, you can donate to a cause that's important to you. And people really appreciate that because we're going after local causes for, where they're located specifically. So we're making it hyper local, like you guys talked about earlier, really understanding what people in New York are dealing with versus people in Texas versus people in California. We're customizing them that way.
Excellent. So we've got a few minutes left. Just Nelia, we've got time for one more question. Is that fair? Okay, great. So I know that the last thing we just want to touch on and get Tom's input on this is, the buyer's journey is clearly changing. So Tom, I'm curious, how is Rapid7 thinking about the buyer's journey? What's been the impact of how you think about, well, how does my marketing mix change now?
Yeah, I think it's a really it's a great conversation, and I think this is the one, to be transparent, I think this is the one that we're really trying to work through at the minute. And I can sort of talk through sort of how we think about it and where we're at. At a very sort of simplified level, we talk about our growth funnel with 3 distinct segments. We talk about an awareness segment, we talk about an education segment, and we talk about a conversion segment. And so when I'm talking to the teams a lot and we're sort of, looking at, are we lined up in the right places? Ultimately, we're looking at, are we putting dollars and are we putting programs into these different segments, and kind of how do we think about them? I think one of the things that we've seen over the last sort of month is a shift away from engagement in our quote unquote conversion area of the funnel, where people are moving sort of back up into education, less so to awareness, but more into education. So what we've seen is that we had this sort of traditional funnel of, top sort of broad awareness and our programs driving that, education segment in the middle with people that we're trying to nurture and bring through a journey through to conversion, where we're asking them to do far more sort of sales ready focused interactions. We've almost got this kind of, I'm trying to articulate the best way to drive it, but sort of fat area in the center, where sort of, our conversion and our awareness, people are moving more into the education area quickly. And I think that's consistent with some of the things I've heard from this group. And so our focus has really been, if we want to meet our customers where we are, how do we start to put more programs in place that are less focused on, hey, we want to get you converted and engaged in a conversation, versus, hey, let's see how we can have a dialogue about what are you trying to learn and how can we help educate, right? And so our content, our digital programs, our engagements, the types of events we've been running, far less of a bias towards, let's have a conversation now and get you into the sales process, more around, what are you trying to educate yourself on and how can we kind of work with you on a journey to get there?
That's an interesting observation too. And actually I was chatting with Dominique Levin. She runs a sales training company, Winning by Design. And she was saying that, the questioning, the techniques that you're using, much more focus on how do I pull them into that education, that curiosity phase, than the questions you're used to asking to talk about a product. So it's not only on the marketing side, but on the sales side, it changes a little bit how we interact, and it requires a total level of rethinking. Certainly consistent with what Tom showed, I'm definitely seeing organizations that are saying, hey, we're going to focus much more on the awareness, and we're going to let the indicators allow us to see how we're now going to go and create demand, versus where we typically would hit the blast mode to try to get as many people out there. So I agree with you. Other comments on ideas on, from a buyer's journey standpoint, how you're thinking about your buyer's journey and how you see it changing?
Well, we just have a few more minutes left, so please, if you have a question or would like to share, now's a great time to do it. Warning to wrap up with the last topics.
And if there's any other ideas that you've been saying, gee, I really would like to share this. This is something you've learned during these challenging times. We'd love to hear it. So if anybody has a really interesting idea or something that maybe it's not super interesting but highly effective, would also be really interesting to hear as well.
So this a little outside the box and potentially selfish, as you guys might understand in a moment, but I was listening to John tell me earlier how he's looking forward to playing golf with John Penrose this weekend. I too was struggling to get new clients to kind of answer my initial requests, or even get a significant FaceTime with existing partners, given concerns over COVID, whatever, they don't want to meet in a Starbucks or in their office as they traditionally have. Twice now, I've offered to have a socially distancing meeting over 9 holes on the golf course, and I'm 2 for 2 on those meeting requests for some odd reason. I can't seem to connect the dots, but yeah, I mean, I love playing golf, but it's nice now that it's a avenue that some people are more comfortable acting on rather than, you know, the traditional, right?
Certainly, and I think it's actually, if you look at rounds of golf across the country, they're way up because, you know, there's no sports, people are dying to get outside. So it's an interesting aspect that even 9 holes makes it sound pretty simple and unobtrusive, and let's just, you know, we'll say goodbye afterwards, and you know, that I think that's interesting.
Yeah, you can't go to the bar and get them a drink, right? So it doesn't become a 5-6 hour affair. You know, let's
Correct.
stretch some legs, and you know, you might have to listen to me talk for a few minutes, but we'll be outside.
Okay, any other questions or comments as we wrap up here? Just before I pass it over to Neil, I just want to thank you all for your precious time this morning. I know it's very important and valuable, and really appreciate you coming and sharing ideas. And this is a very interesting time, and I think as we look at how we will market and sell, it will change us systemically for the future, but also for the better in many ways. So best of luck to all of you.
Thank you also for coming. Couple of things. Don't forget to sign on to Mass TLC Central, a place where you guys can connect to each other. I recorded this event because there's a lot of people, got a lot of requests today saying, are you recording it? I want to hear it. So I will be sending that your way. And thank you again for your time. Thanks, John and Tom, for your expertise and your share. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.